You're tuned in to RX Radio.
I was going back and forth the other day on whether or not I thought that it was better to start being a coach now or start being a coach when we started. And I don't know if I can I think the answer, as always, is that depends. But I think as I was about to embark on this thought, I had a preconceived notion that I was going to arrive very quickly at the place of it's better now than it was then. But as I worked through the thought, I ended up being really torn down the middle 50-50.
Okay, and why is that?
The people who... It was harder to find the information when we started, but when you found it, it was pretty good. I think the average of people who were doing it at a level where they could have the resources or the means or the ability to, publish in something that you could find in a magazine or on a forum or something like that, there was a level of dedication that was a prerequisite to them getting to that point where you could digest the information they were putting out. Because, you hear some of the names and they're still I don't know if in, let's say, I don't know how long, 20 years or so, 25 years, there'll be the consensus that the people in the industry right now that are moving the needle as far as putting out good information and that's applicable at high levels, it's principles based. I think of, I think of Poliquin, I think of Thibodeau, I think of Czech. And, some of them have lived long enough to become the villain. But I think by and large, I don't know if we're going to be able to look back in 20 years and succinctly say, collectively as an industry, these people really moved the needle in 2024. Right? And so I just think the prerequisite, the constraint of how difficult it was to, one, obtain the experience, to get the information, and then how difficult it was to spread said information to a point where there was someone out there who was looking for that particular beacon was just way harder.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And I think you can draw a parallel to business with this, technology specifically. If you think of computers back when you and I were growing up, you didn't really have many options. And we'll say just Microsoft and Apple were kind of the options. And they were the OGs. They were the first ones to the table. And if you look at their development over time, they're the ones that have rose to the top because they were able to start off, and they were kind of shitty when they started off compared to what they are now, but they were the best then, and they've continued to stay ahead of the curve because they kind of ran with that growth and they continued that over the time period of, I don't know, last 20, 30 years. Right? I kind of think of the same thing with coaches, and that's fortunately, I think, where you and I kind of land on this curve is we got into coaching when it was that period where information was hard to find. And you had to go to these sources that were, maybe not, maybe they were the Mac, the Apple computer. Was it those fucking, they had the colored laptops. They were the first, I don't know. I don't fucking know. It doesn't matter. Anyways, back then, the information that we were getting was the best available information, but I don't think the quality was as good as it is right now, right? Because the internet wasn't what it is now. We didn't use it to share this information the same way that we do now. And there's not as much, funding, and fitness was kind of a fringe thing when you and I were growing up. It wasn't as pop culture, as mainstream as it is right now. So I think the people that were into it, they were really on the right track. But I don't think the quality of information was as high a quality as it is the information right now. So if you look at competition in the technology space, you can probably go to Best Buy and see 3 computers that companies that started maybe in the last 5-10 years. And maybe they're not as good as a MacBook now, but they're a lot better than MacBooks were when they first started back in, I don't know, 1990. Whenever. That's kind of how I think of the information in the coaching industry, is that it's a lot easier to be a pretty good coach right now than it ever would have been 20 years ago because of the information, the quality of information, the ease in finding it. versus 20 years ago, it was a career. Like people dedicated their entire life to acquiring that knowledge and learning that, and there were very few and far between that had kind of gone that route. And I think people in our generation, they exist in that in between where we grew up in a time where you had to be really bought in to want to seek out that knowledge. And then throughout our career, we got this bonus that knowledge was becoming more readily available. There's better quality knowledge that was more accessible, and that really accelerated that curve. So it kind of that back in the 90s or early 2000s, that was like the period where the vetting process, where the people that were going to make this their profession had already decided, and now they just got more resources along the way, kind of like say like Apple or Microsoft or something that sort. It's like they were there and they got the funding and they got the money and they were able to grow and stay ahead of the curve. Versus people that are coming up now, it's almost like an entitlement to information, or there's so much information available that it's overwhelming, that we're maybe on the other side of that bell curve where, okay, this information is so readily available that you can get inundated with it, but it's still going to take someone that's pretty dedicated to sort through it and figure out exactly what they want to take from it. And I think that's how I look at it as I speak through this before I've ever thought of it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you bring up the bell curve, because I think what centers the bell curve and what then causes, because like a bell curve it's like a mirrored expression of two what I would call logarithmic relationships, right? So there's linear relationships. Like a bell curve is not a bell tent. It's not a bell triangle. It's a bell curve. So what you see as like you trend up on one side before you hit that like inflection point and this massive rise that makes the left side of the bell, and then subsequently on the inverse as it comes downward, the right side of the bell, is there's a softening at the top which creates that sort of round plateau that maybe plateaus for one particular moment or point on the graph, and then it starts to arc continually downward. And those relationships on either side, like if you were to go to a bell curve, you draw straight down the middle, and you had mirror curves that had this logarithmic expression, which means they're not scaling linearly in a straight line, rise over run, y equals mx plus b. It's not the same thing. There's this massive inflection point. That inflection, that arc, is representative of like a logarithmic relationship where you're scaling supralinearly. And then you're running into the same, if you follow the direction from left to right on the x-axis, you're now scaling supralinearly back down. And then you could draw and you could contain the meaty part of the bell curve, which I think is going to be your ability to synthesize and apply. That's if we're talking about information, quality coaching, and then the rise and fall of good and bad coaching as a byproduct of the exponential expression of more information, where like, because good coaching has not scaled with good information. The bottom has come up, like what you would call the end tails of the distribution. The bottom has come up, but I don't think it's necessarily risen the top as much as it's risen the bottom. It's flat. Hashtag flatten the curve. It's flattened the curve, I think, a little bit, because the bottom, the acceptable bad, is way better than it was before. But I think, honestly, one of the constraints is now the synthesization process of the information that's out there, and synthesizing this information is always going to come down to your willingness to and your resources in which you can apply the information. So I think when we're looking at the top performers of coaching, and you can plot them across this bell curve of how much information they have, where some may have too much, and so quality would be plotted on the y-axis, and quality of information would be plotted on the y-axis, and quality of coaching would be on the x-axis. So as you move on the x-axis, you see that the values come closer to the x. It's like that middle part is harder to move. It's harder to move the middle in anything. It's harder. It's easier to pull the end tails one direction or the other. And I think what that middle part is the time it takes to synthesize and, more importantly, apply. And I think that's where, with the digital age and digital coaching and remote coaching being such a part of the industry that it wasn't before, it's the opportunity to actually apply the information you're learning in a meaningful setting. Because sometimes I wonder, and I sit back and go, man, these kids don't know how good they have it. I wish that I knew then what I know now. But I think it's the application process that is going to slowly over time have the ceiling start to rise in accordance with the with the basement. If you're still listening and you want to have something that I wish I had in the early stages of training, if you don't watch us on YouTube, go on YouTube and search the podcast. We put together a coach's field guide that will put you a leg up in exercise programming. And we're going to talk about exercise programming today because I think one of the places where there's the most amount of noise, a rapid amount of influx of information, and an inability to synthesize that information in a way that allows you to apply it and improve your skills as a coach is programming. Programming is, it's so often discussed, it's so often researched. What's the best program to run? It's probably the question that I get asked most often by people. And I think there's a lot of elements to it. So if you guys are interested, head over to the YouTube channel. In the description, there'll be a link to download free coach's field guide. It's fairly comprehensive, but it should give you an interesting slant on programming. And then what we'll do today is we'll talk about a checklist for exercise programming and like exercise programming in the real world, which is where the intersection of information and value as a coach really come to a precipice. It's can you do it in the real world? Like, we're not going to sit here and write blogs about it, although you could. You're going to sit there and put together a program that a human being is going to do. When we're thinking of a checklist, like someone has come to you and you said, right, I want you to write a program for me. What are like the high bullet points that you're going to check off before you give that person a spreadsheet or give that person a Word doc with exercises and sets and reps and number of days a week and all that? Like, what are the big rocks you're looking to turn over before you're at a final product that you're like, this is an exercise program?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think absolutely the first thing you need to understand is what their goals are, right? You can't program to something if you don't know where you're going. So first off, you need to have a good understanding of exactly what they want to accomplish. And that, maybe it's a text box on an intake sheet for some coaches. Maybe that's a conversation for people that are working in person or doing Zoom calls, whatever that is. But you need a pretty complete understanding of what that person's goals are. And then the inverse side of that is you need to know exactly where they're at right now. So that comes from conversation, that comes from history taking, that comes from assessment. And when I say where someone is right now, you need to know their understanding of how they can accomplish these goals. So whether that's physical competency, like what's their athletic background, where are they coming from, what's their style of training, what's their kind of background knowledge of what they're trying to accomplish. You need to understand injury history, what limitations are going to slow down this process or considerations that you're going to have in that pursuit of the goal that they're looking for. You need to understand their lifestyle. Like, all right, I can write the perfect program, but if this person is, out blowing coke and drinking every weekend, like, we're probably not going to get there. So understanding, like, what's their day-to-day look like literally every single day. Are they a student? Are they a professional athlete? Are they a weekend warrior? Like, what do they do from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed? What kind of stressors, both psychologically, what type of physical stressors throughout the day? What does their diet look like? What capacity are they going to have to be able to recover? Because if we're talking like strictly writing an exercise program, there's going to be this big asterisk behind it. It's like, okay, like, this program will work if you can execute perfectly, but the things that are going to inhibit you from executing perfectly are going to be your stressors, your nutrition, your sleep, your hydration, the things that you encounter on a day-to-day basis that are going to dig you into a deeper recovery debt outside of the gym. So I think, like, on a very fundamental level, before you can write a program for anyone, those are the things that you need to understand. You need to understand their starting point and their destination. And if you don't understand those things, then it's going to be really hard to fill in the gaps. And on the flip side of that, if you're seeking out programming or working with a coach and they never asked you these things, then there's no way that program is specific enough to you for it to be the right answer to accomplish your goals. And some people aren't looking for that. I understand that. Like some people just want a generic, like go to the gym, feel good, and if that's your goal, like cool. There's plenty of stuff out there for that. But even thinking in the way that we started this conversation, like there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of knowledge out there. So like there's better ways for everyone, even like you or I or like coaches at the highest level, like coaches have coaches, and understanding that sometimes it's not even the knowledge that you need. Sometimes it's the accountability and kind of the autonomy. Like I like having a program that either I've written for myself in the past for the future or someone else has just given to me, because it takes the thought out of it for me. It's like, all right, like I know a lot about programming, but sometimes I just don't want to fucking think about it. And like I had a shit day, and like the last thing I want to do is like make decisions around training. So it's like, all right, I'm just going to look at the sheet and I'm going to do what's on the sheet and know that either past me or someone else has thought about these variables, my lifestyle variables, and this is the right thing for me to do. And I'm just going to fucking do it. But I mean, to answer your question, that's like, those are the two things that I find most important when writing a program is like, you need to know the starting point. You need an accurate depiction of the starting point. You need to know the end goal, and you need to know the things that are going to allow or inhibit progress along the way from those 2 points.
Yeah, I think like programming is just a gap analysis. That's all it is. It's a gap analysis of, and I think you bring up an interesting, like bookending this process, I think is really useful because it fits with this idea that in order to solve a problem, you need to frame the problem accurately first. I think too many people waste time trying to solve a problem, and they don't waste enough time, air quote, they don't spend enough time trying to frame the problem correctly. And I think quite literally bookending, starting point and desired goal. And I think there's two things that complete this. If we're to think about a framing of a problem, like in a frame having 4 kind of dimensions to it or 4 sides to it, the goal has a time constraint to it, and we can reverse engineer the start point to that, and that could square off one of the sides. But I think there's also the understanding of how you got to your starting point. This is where I see a lot of coaches miss a massive opportunity. So far in trying to frame the problem of writing an exercise program, we have, the more obvious, let's get a clear understanding of the snapshot of where you are right now, and let's get clear on a realistic place of where you want to go. And, it doesn't take, honestly, from some of the programs I see, it might actually take a genius to reverse engineer like a meaningful program to get someone to an end goal. And I think that's the obvious next step. When we're dealing with coaches writing programming, we highlight the importance of getting like a good sort of snapshot, diagnostic, functionally, lifestyle, behaviorally, whatever. And then on the flip side of that, we have a desired end state with sort of objective KPIs, key performance indicators, and then we can reverse engineer from a timeline. I think the part that coaches miss is establishing the events that led us up to the starting line, rather than just looking at this future 6, 8, 12, 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, whatever timeline to our end goal. It's like, yeah, but how did we get here? Because, like weight loss can be complex at times. There's a lot of factors to it, as much as, some content creators can try and oversimplify the data aspect to it. And I don't think no one woke up and wondered how they got out of shape, right? I don't think it's a mystery to anyone, right? It's not as if people have been, going to bed every night and someone's sneaking into their house, injecting their salad with a bunch of fucking calories. Like it's not, I think we're at a point now where, and look, back then, we talked about this before, both our parents smoked and thought nothing of it for like a really long time. It's like, really? You walk into a restaurant and you can't see the waiter and there's just fucking blue haze and you thought, this is so cool. This is so cool. And they were right. It is cool. And if you vape, you're a loser. But that's how bad vaping is that it makes smoking look cool. Where I have respect for smokers now. Because I choose, I can grab a USB stick, but I do this instead. I want to carry around a pack of smokes just to give it to people when they ask. Like just to have, like, hey man, you got to smoke? Yes, I do. I don't smoke, but I want these for you so you can continue to smoke. Because if anyone ever came up and asked me, like, hey bro, you got a vape? I think I'd punch him in the throat.
Yeah.
But so I think it's useful. It's like, okay, we've established this framework. And I think a key part of closing that frame is understanding how we got here, because people are going to, and this is the coaching side. This is like, this is a coach's field guide to exercise programming. That's what's in the link in the description for the YouTube channel. If you're listening to us on Spotify, go to the YouTube channel, click it, get your free copy, because coaches deal with people. We're not dealing with exercise programming. We don't program computers. We're coaches. We program for individuals, for people. Even having a conversation about how we got here. Look, at some point, this person was likely in some form of physical shape. It may have been a long time ago. It may have gone back to their teenage years. But we need to understand the pitfalls and the habits that have led people down this cyclical road to getting in worse and worse shape over time, right? Like, because how many times do you get this? Man, I used to be in killer shape when I was in high school, or when I got out of college, I was doing this. One of the questions that I'll often ask is, when in your life do you remember being in the best shape? And how close to that is your current goal to that? If I could only get back to this. Most people have fairly realistic filters over their goal setting process. And frankly, if you understand people and you understand exercise and you understand how to communicate, the majority of goals that I have kind of thrown at my feet by people, various skill sets, various levels of athleticism, are often conservative to what we end up getting done. Right? Because they have been bought into a system of lack of specificity. They bought into a system of generic exercise programming or generic nutrition, who hasn't factored in the start and the end point and how we're going to get to the end point, but how we got to the start point. And that's a good thing. Use that to your advantage, right? Under promise, over deliver. But, I think the coaching world has these ingrained axioms of how much weight can be lost in a certain amount of time, how much strength can be gained in a certain amount of time. And it's just based off some older information. It's based off of an inability to operate a principles-based approach and really squeeze the most out of every session possible. If you can coach and you can do your job and you can make adaptations on the fly, and you can understand the human part of it, you can really start to move the needle and get people either get to their goals faster, which means you need to find new goals and you need to start writing a program for those new goals, which oftentimes the new goals are continuations of, hey, oh wow, now I've lost 10 pounds. Okay, well, I wonder what 20 would look like. Okay, off we get to lose another 10. Or it's something, now that I've lost 10 pounds, now I want to play rec league basketball. Okay, let's kind of switch this up a bit. Let's talk about, tendon stiffness and ankles and change of direction and all this stuff. But I think one of the when you're comprising this checklist of exercise programming, I think, yes, obviously the gap analysis, where we are, where we're going, how we're going to get there is the program, but how we got here, those are going to be the pitfalls we need to look out for, right? I was told at a young age when starting a business, find me something that worked 20 years ago and I'll give you something that works in 20 years. And I thought, okay, education kind of makes sense because education's been around for a long time and likely in some capacity it will be around for a long time. Now, there's obviously unicorn companies and fields that emerge, but by and large, that's a half decent thought process when starting a business. It's the same thing with this. Like, you show me where it's gone off the handle before, and I will show you where it's going to go off the handles again. So when we write a program, like one of the things, I overheard this at the gym this morning. There was a client getting trained. It seemed like for the first time, I hadn't seen him before, a trainer in the gym that I'm working out at now. And they were talking about these very things that we're discussing. They were talking about diet and nutrition and habits. And the guy's like, yeah, I don't really drink. I unless it's like I go to a wine or a winery or some brewery or something. And that's just like I was walked out of the fucking building because I was like, oh yeah, like there's this kind of casual understanding, and the trainer's great, and he was good at keeping a straight face, but it's like the reason I bring this up and the next thing on the checklist as kind of a byproduct of now we're filling in the gaps between current state and desired state, understanding we're creating a roadmap to get from one to the other, but also creating a retroactive, topography of how we got here, right? The map isn't the territory, which is a quote that I absolutely fucking love. But you have to understand both. Right? You have to understand the map and the territory to get to where you want to go, right? Like if you just look at this map and it's this two-dimensional thing and you don't know how to infer the territory, you're like, oh, I'm just going to go this way. It's like, well, you can't because there's a giant fucking river there. Or you can't because those little triangles, yeah, those are mountains, idiot. Like you have to understand the map and the territory. And the pass gives you the territory and the program gives you the map. But you need to have an understanding of both. And I thought about that, and the point I'm trying to make here is understand the role of environment at every single level. Like if you change... When you understand a little bit, not even a lot, a little bit about what drives human behavior, what drives, we talked about evolution in different capacities. One of the main things that drives evolution is environment. So when we're talking to people about writing a program, right, the environment that they're in at home, the environment that they're in at work, the environment that they're in a social setting, the environment that they're in when they're playing physical activity. I know people who've gotten out of shape because they didn't like people on their fucking rec league softball team. Okay, easy environment shift. Fucking get a new team, right? Like, oh yeah, I used to play Thursday, but Dave's an asshole. Crowds the fucking plate or whatever. It's like, okay, well fucking charge the mound. Fuck Dave, knock his teeth out. Now you have a good environment. Like environment is literally, yeah, fuck yeah. Environment is, so if I'm to add one to the checklist, and we can expand on this, but I almost want to throw it at the feet of coaches and be like, every time there's a behavior you need to change, there's an environment you need to consider, right? So whether it's nutritionally at home, I'm not saying go fucking full what's their bucket and raid their kitchen cupboards and like pull like some Grinch stole Christmas shit and they wake up and there's nothing but lint in the cupboards. But like, hey, understand the environment, because like killed me this morning when I heard that. Yeah, I only drink when I go to brewery. So what the fuck you go to a brewery then, you idiot? Like just don't fucking go to the brewery and you won't drink. Like change of environment. But I challenge people, think about every behavior change you're trying to elicit and see if you can't use the environmental constraint to just solve that problem immediately. Bad food in the house, unsupportive partner at home, a gym you don't like, a gym you can't get to, a job you don't like. All of these things are going to have way more predictive value in the success and outcomes of these things you want to change than here's a recipe book or follow the guy that does Starbucks orders that are low fat. Like fuck all of that. That's just noise. That's bullshit. The environment is going to be the key to change.
Yeah, environment. That's a sick addition to this. Because there's a lot of truth to that. And I've seen it in so many different ways, like in different aspects. I coach a lot of Olympic weightlifting, and that's like a huge environment one. Like I can tell a lot of times if people are going to make a lift or not just based off of what the environment is and like the energy in the room. And something I've seen huge with the level 3 that we do is like, yo, that room, that's an environment. Like there's some sharks in there. There's blood in the water. Like people are showing up to perform. Like no one wants to be the guy that's tapping out or bowing down. Like that's an environment in there. So like when it comes to performance, like fuck yeah. But even in a more practical sense, like if it comes to losing weight, like put someone in an environment that encourages better decisions. Like I was saying, like I don't like to think about my programming some days. Like put them in an environment where they don't have to think about grabbing a donut, or put them in an environment where they're going to go to the gym on the way home because we convince them to switch gyms to somewhere that's more convenient to them for them to go to. Like that's a huge one. So I think that's a really good addition to the list before you get to like any of the hard skills of programming. I think also then as we start to look into like, all right, we have this taken care of. We have a starting point. We've done that gap analysis. We know how they got to that starting point. We know what their goal is. We've kind of had some conversation around the environment. That's when you can start to have those conversations around, okay, like here's the plan. We start to build a plan and we start to understand what needs to change. And something that I've found really important in this process is being able to interpret what people actually mean by their goals. Because you and I, like we understand the process. Like if you want to lose weight, okay, calories out greater than calories in, like less food, more activity. Cool, easy. But people have these just goals that are not really based off of reality or understanding the process. So sometimes you need to understand what someone is saying by their goal, and in your mind kind of break that down into phases or steps that are going to put them in position to accomplish that goal. So like, I don't know, generally someone wants to lose some weight, put on some muscle. Okay, like what they think of in their mind is they're going to eat salads and they're going to do bicep curls. Like, all right, yeah, kind of, but there's more to it than just that. Like there's a process to each of these things. We're not just going to restrict calories down to nothing and then put you in the gym and have you do a bunch of bicep curls, because that's not how the body works. That's not how, biology works. That's not how we're going to get to this goal. It's not the most efficient way. So thinking about this, you need, as you're the one designing the program, you need to think about what is the most efficient and effective way to accomplish that goal. Because yes, it might be effective to have them eat no food and do bicep curls. They might lose weight, but that's not going to be the best way. Like adherence is going to suffer at a certain point. Like if you have them on 900 calories a day, how long can you realistically do that for? And then you have them in the gym working out hard. How long can they realistically do that for? Like they're going to feel beat up because they don't have the food to recover. They're going to feel run down. They're going to lose enjoyment or excitement around working out, which any of this stuff, I think the benefit to getting people results in the gym is that dopamine hit, is that feeling good, like you've accomplished something, the endorphins that you're going to get from a workout when you perform well or you feel good, or you're able to do something that you haven't done before. So understanding like, yes, this might be this person's goal, and there's going to be ways that are more effective to get them there are going to be ways that are more efficient, but it's going to be a balancing act of what is the most efficient and effective way to get this person that I now have an understanding of how they got to this point in their physical competency and an understanding of the lifestyle and environmental things that are going to hang them up. How can I design something that is efficient and effective for them, that's based in reality, not based in, what's optimal or what's ideal, or they need to make these unrealistic changes to their life to be able to maintain, because that's not going to work. They're going to run into bottlenecks much sooner if that's the approach that you take. So you need to take the ideal approach, and then you need to fit that to what is realistic for that specific person. And there are going to be some people, like my favorite clients are the ones that the only gap we need to fill is education and direction. Like I need to give you the information that you need to be able to do this properly. And you're going to take that, you're going to absorb that information, and you're going to execute on it. Like fucking sick. Like that makes my job so easy, because you're going to understand like, okay, we're only going to restrict calories 300 we're only going to restrict 300 calories a day. We're going to put you in a moderate deficit, and you're going to lose a half a pound a week, and you're going to do that, and you're going to adhere to that, and we're going to have 3 days of exercises that we're going to go through, and we're going to do that until we don't see progress, and then we're going to make changes to that. Like if I can communicate that and they execute on it, sick. That's the perfect client. That's the ideal situation, because all you have to do is put the plan in place, and they're going to execute. But there's going to be a lot of people that, whatever it is, if it's something that they want to impress you, or they don't want to let you down, or they have an ego around what they're doing and they're resistant to change, like there's going to be these things that there might be communication around, or there might not be communication around it, that you're going to have to interpret some of whatever your means of communication is with them, and then you're going to have to interpret what they're telling you through that, whether that's decreased performance in the gym, or the scale weight is not budging, or it's going up, or you notice that, after the weekend, like the scale weight's a little bit higher, and then throughout the week it kind of dwindles down, and then it spikes up again. Like you need to be able to interpret some of these things that are a little less verbal, that aren't explicitly communicated, so that you can make changes based off of what you're seeing. And that's what the program is. The program is your ability as a coach to communicate with that client, and that's the application side of things. So being able to interpret and make it more efficient, make it more effective, and base it in reality, that's kind of one of the soft skills of coaching that you need to refine and you need to develop, so that you can get people results regardless of where they're at and what their lifestyle factors are. Because and sometimes it is like, some people do really well with direct communication, and that's something I appreciate in coaching. I don't like to beat around the bush, or I don't like to have to be like, fuck this, I know this person's going to go out this weekend, and shit's going to be all messed up beginning of the week, and then I'm going to have to account for that. I like to be like, hey, like what happened this weekend? Like scale weight's higher. like your numbers are down, like you're using less weight, like what's going on, and have a conversation around that. But that style of communication isn't effective with everyone. So you can't approach everyone that way, or that's how you weed out your clientele, is because you do approach everyone that way, and people that don't respond to that just don't come to you. But you're stifling your ability or your addressable market as a coach if you approach it in that way.
I think one of the things that programming, because I think we might even be glassing over something that you and I think that's so obvious, and we use the word communication a lot, but I think one of the keys in communicating an exercise program is giving your clients access to the program. I have found this is because there's a lot to that, right? Like I think we talked about the map is not the territory. Well, you have clients who don't know how to interpret the territory and don't know how to create a map. And I think giving them the exercise program that you've created for them helps them do both simultaneously. And I think that's the mark of like a really good coach is they will give someone the program, share the program with them, because there's a couple of reasons why I think this is really important. One, it allows people to understand the nonlinear relationship of progress, right? If you have these things and you can draw these trend lines over time, you can be like, hey, look, we've seen this before. Remember on this exercise where we were accumulating too much fatigue and we deloaded, and you came back the week after and you fucking hit, an extra 3 reps or an extra 5 pounds or whatever the metric was. So that's the very act of then having access to it, being able to see the story of progress that you're both writing together over time, that allows them to understand the territory of training, right? Rather than just going in and being like, was that better? Was that worse? Like so many clients, especially, novice clients who don't know map or territory, will look at me like, was that good? In a couple of weeks, if I show them the program and I walk them through and they have access to it, and there's another thing I want to talk about the numbers and the metrics that we track, they're going to know whether it's good. And they're also going to know whether good or bad is good or bad, right? Because it's like someone will come in and then like with that one example of like, hey, we're 2 reps short this week. It could be a territory. Okay, sure. Yeah, we're just going to deload this next week. We're probably going to move this exercise down the order. We'll come back and revisit this in 2 weeks. And then now when we run into this again, I know what this is. I know what this is on the map. I know what this territory entails. And then from that, you end up starting to create, there's a big movement right now. And I like it. I just don't think the movement has evolved to where it's going to end up being. There's a big movement now in reinstating play into training, which I understand. And there's, we could go down many a rabbit hole around sort of the reactive nature of play, like, the sensory input components of it, just the joy you associate play with training. I think that's why you're starting to see a pickleball or paddleball being this emergent new fitness trend. That's why you've seen, rec league sports always be sort of at the forefront. There is something intangible, maybe intangibility is just based off of our understanding, but play is something that's emergent in the fitness culture. We see this CrossFit to a certain degree, but I think what CrossFit does better and what things like High Rocks are now benefiting from, and I think you as a trainer need to tap into this, is on the other end, or the evolution of play as a part of training, is competition, right? And now if you're in the one-to-one PT space, that competition is with yourself. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, the program that you've written and shared with your client and sat down and explained sort of the non-linearity of the progress of the program, the malleability and adaptability of the program, you start to see map and territory come together, but you also start to see an air of competition start to exist within themselves, right? Like, and this is, every data point has the potential. And I would argue that any data point that doesn't have the potential is something that probably shouldn't be tracked to begin with. Every data point that you track should have the potential to be something that you can better every single time. Because, sometimes, look, you're going to stack L's and you're going to stack a lot of them, but there's always a win to be found, right? Like, even if it's, and I had this conversation with someone the other day, and we've discussed it on the podcast, like, there are days where the logbook's not going to move, but it's still the most amount of sessions in your life that you've done that exercise at that weight, right? You've now done a complete other bout of this where prior to last week and this week not existing, you had not done that. So you have now done it. You have now done an entire unit of work that you have not done before. And that will fall into the story of progress over time. So, metric tracking, it can get a little far, and we need to be careful about the validity. So metrics and KPIs need to really follow two things. They need to track what we think they're tracking, and they need to be easily accessible, right? And there's a process to this, right? Like we with the level 3, one of the things that we are concerning ourselves with is the 40-yard dash time. And I love the 40-yard dash, especially when the level 3 is not about training athletes. It's about training in high stakes environment, which a lot of people don't realize that every environment that they train in, regardless if you run an online business or if you run an in-person business at your own gym, one to many, one to small group training, whatever. If you're dealing with people in this industry and you want to make an impact, you have to understand that we work in a high stakes environment and you need to treat it as such. The 40-yard dash, what I like about it is that it teaches people the importance of understanding this key rule of KPIs. And one of the key rules of KPIs is it's something that it's information you need to be able to access very quickly. In that comparison, by that definition, a 40-yard dash is a very bad KPI because I can't fucking do it every day, right? I have no idea what someone's 40 is until combine. I know kind of when it comes in, but I know that I can't test that 40 every week. Right? Because otherwise by that, it is in a lot of ways, in a lot of people's definitions of what a KPI really is, that's our key performance indicator. It's like, well, not really. Because like a specific attribute of a KPI is it has to be readily available to us, right? And we only have availability to it on like an 8-week cycle. We may now have a rough number coming in if we do some sort of baseline testing. Sometimes we won't do that at all. And we have an idea when they're in Indianapolis running their 40. But a 40, by the definition of what a KPI is, or if we are adopting one of the definitions of a KPI is something that has to be readily accessible, a 40 is a bad KPI. So what data are we collecting that can allow us to compete with ourselves with that data point weekly and allow for that data point to be collected at a moment's notice, right? With zero collateral to the rest of the training. Because again, what these data points allow for us to do is each one is an opportunity to help explain either the map or the territory, right? And the more data you collect, the better your client's going to move towards the target on the map, and the more efficiently they're going to now understand the territory, so that regardless of goal, we have this frame of reference that we can draw back to, this learning experience that this data has provided us. Without that learning experience, it's just masturbation. It's just coaches fucking crunching numbers and having people prick their fingers and do all this stuff, which, like, don't get me wrong, one of the best coaches that we know collects a ton of data, and the data changes the way he makes decisions on a daily basis. We're talking obviously about James McIntosh. But if it doesn't, if it's not a teaching moment, then don't collect it.
That's a really strong point. And I think where that starts to translate into actionables for programming, your warm-ups are your KPIs. That's what they should be. The first thing that you do with your clients as they walk in the gym is you're getting performance indicators for that day. And like a pretty applicable way to think of this is like, I have someone, it's me, trying to improve their 1 rep max back squat. Okay. So I'm going to walk in the gym on a given day. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a series of movements in my warm up that are going to give me some sort of indication of what performance might be on that day. And then based off of that, I'm going to make a decision on what my loading on the bar for back squat is going to be, or maybe I change my rep scheme or my intention for that day. Like maybe it's something along the line of a B stance RDL, so I can feel out, the hip flexion, rotation through the hips, and see where that's at. Maybe it's a walking lunge, so I can see how well I can coordinate pelvic stability into force transfer in the ground. And there's a series of movements that I'll do to get an understanding or a baseline with myself or with a client of where they're at on that given day and their readiness to perform. And that's going to give you some sort of framework towards making decisions around what the rest of that session is going to look like. Because maybe the program has a plan that, all right, today I'm going to test a heavy single. But as I go through my warm-ups and as I go through these performance indicators, I'm seeing that it doesn't really look like I'm in position to do anything that's going to warrant a heavy single. Like, I'm not going to get a beneficial stimulus, and it's not even going to be a beneficial data point or baseline to have on that given day. Then maybe we pull back and it's like, you know what? The stability is not there to be able to load this person to an extent that's going to be meaningful. Maybe this is going to be more of a skill work and hypertrophy bias day that I work on. Maybe I hit some singles at 70% and work on my re-rack and walkout so that I nail that down independent of load and I understand the process. And there's some sort of learning that is still available to me. There's some sort of benefit outside of a loading progression that I can pull from that. But then I'm going to be able to make adaptations within that session that are going to set me up for better success down the line. And that's something that you should do immediately when you walk in the gym. Like, I work with a lot of Olympic weightlifters in person and remote, and I always have those things in their program. It's going to be maybe before we snatch, we're going to do a snatch grip push press, and we're going to see how that feels. We're going to prime the position. Yes, we're going to get some sort of exposure there, but also if we can get a baseline of how 90 kilos felt last week to 90 kilos today, then that's going to give me some sort of performance indication towards, am I ready to really load up the snatch today? Or should I keep it a little bit more conservative? Maybe I should work on core tension as the bar leaves the ground, and then I'll send it in my front squats later on. And I think that's a really important point that you made there is that, yes, like, first off, data collection, like, collect data like you should. And the point around competition is really good too, because that's when I work with people in person, I have metrics on every single exercise they do. And the reason I have that is to motivate them, and that paired with the KPIs that I have on them, that may not be a communication that I have open with them, or it may be, it's like, hey, this looked a little shaky today. We're not going to push load here. So maybe we're going to add an extra set because you only did 3 working sets. We're going to do a 4th one today so we can really nail down the stability. And it's a conversation around what you're seeing in real time and their ability to perform in real time. And then what you're doing is you're making modifications on that given day so that they can still have a productive training session, regardless of their readiness to push load or velocity or volume on any given day.
Yeah, like I think of, there was a play in NFL preseason, I'm sure some of you listening saw it, where it was Kansas City versus, maybe it was Baltimore. I think that was week 1. I think it was actually before that. And it was Mahomes to Kelsey, but Kelsey had ran the wrong route. And Mahomes was like kind of mad, but he just threw the ball like behind his back and ended up getting it in Kelsey's hands. But he was like pissed after the game. He was like, yeah, the idiot ran the wrong route. I was like, exactly. But he audibled, not, but an audible, technically the term comes from before a play call changing the play, or before a play is about to start changing the play call. He changed the play call in the middle of the play and was able to do so and still get forward yardage. Right, where he was still able to push uphill and was able to adapt by what was in front of him. You said something really interesting there that I think, when we're talking about data and we're talking about coaching, that you said based off of what you see, not what you hear. Because look, if we've been doing this a long time at enough level, one of the reasons, and you touched on it earlier, one of the reasons people seek out a coach is for that accountability. It's probably one of the reasons that coaches seek out coaches most often is for that accountability piece. And I'm sure you're the same, have had some of my best lifts on the days where I felt the worst.
Yeah.
We need to contextualize KPIs and, an axiom behind the Prescript brand as we teach coaches about, the art and science of coaching, is we talk about performance being the proxy, not your story about the performance, right? There's a difference. The difference between pain and suffering is the story you tell yourself about the pain. Like, that's when performance is very similar. Like, people will tell you that felt bad. Now, felt bad versus painful, obviously there's some discernment to be had there. Like, if someone goes, that felt bad, and they like shit themselves, you're like, oh, okay, like, yeah, maybe we're done here for today and consider go to the hospital. But, oh, that felt bad. And I've had so many of my best coaches go, well, it looked pretty good, so we're going to keep going. And This is where This is where coaching kicks in. This is where you need to start taking some responsibility. I've had coaches say that and things have gone terribly wrong. I had a coach say that once. I went up and weight, I passed out and I put my head through a plain glass window, and he then sent me the invoice for the broken glass. And it was like, okay, misstep there, insult to injury, and that glass is pretty expensive. At least I thought. It wasn't that big. But the point being is, I think one of the virtues, or a virtue that I value, virtue and value are odd to put together in the same sentence, is discernment. Discernment is understanding how to reply in context of the situation, roughly speaking. Like, should this person not do something because they don't feel good? Sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no. You need to discern which one is which. What time were we in? Do they need to get pushed or do we need to pull back? And a lot of that comes down to paying attention to someone temperamentally. I have clients who, some of my least physically capable clients are mentally ruthless. And they are sometimes the ones that are hardest to read. Like, oh, I want to do another set. It's like, I don't know, dude. Like, you go pretty fucking hard in one set and I need to pull that guy back. Where it's like, maybe based off his body composition, he should be able to go again, but he fucking redlines it. And I need to have that ability to discern when to pull back and when to throttle up. That's really where coaching, that's where I don't think, people are talking about AI. And I don't, until when an AI learns discernment, that's when I think I'm fucked, right? That's what I think the industry is fucked. And that's where coaching, and that's what, because I think we're so far away from that, right? Like, we had some technical issues prior to starting the podcast. My brilliant ass goes, try turning your computer off and turning it back on again. If in 6 months AI has figured out discernment, color me surprised, because if this is the way we fix tech issues now, I don't think I'm too concerned about it, but what do I know? So I think that's a big piece, because one of the things you're going to have to fight against in certain populations when discerning KPIs is things that muddy the waters. A classic example, and I see it all the time, you see it posted online every day, your Oura Ring or your Whoop Band or these things. These are going to give you the illusion of a KPI. It's not a KPI. It's not a key performance indicator. Right? These are things that a thing that you wear puts on a user interface. I don't particularly love these tools. I think they create the sense of capture over the people who use them. I don't need something on my wrist to tell me how I feel. Right? What will tell me if I'm truly fatigued? Fatigue and the difference between fatigue and tired, which is something that over time, if you learn the map and the territory through executing and following through on well-written programming or improvingly well-written programming over time, is you get to discern the difference between fatigue and tired, right? Fatigue is a systemic process. Fatigue is a neurochemical process, right? Like a neurotransmitter issue. This fatigue is systemic downregulation of your central and peripheral nervous system. Like, tired is, I was bored at work today, or, I got stuck in traffic and my pre-workout wore off. That's tired, right? And I think when we are looking at the many options of KPIs that we can track, being able to understand what KPI is actually a KPI, right? Aura and Whoop, those can be noise. And I want to get something abundantly clear. This tool and the toolbox analogy that coaches use is a scapegoat for coaches who don't know how to build anything, right? If you've ever been a general contractor, if you've ever worked with your hands, right? Oh, the right tool for the right job. It's like, really? I've seen a Puerto Rican guy in Toronto build an entire house with a garden spade and a fucking 16-ounce ball peen hammer, right? That because that's a fucking, look at Michelangelo. What were his tools? Marble and a fucking chisel, right? There's an artistry to it. There's a skill set to it. Everyone's out. We can all go to Home Depot right now, right? We can all go to Home Depot. Every fucking broccoli-haired kid who doesn't know how to change a tire, and I could get him decked out with all the tools. I could get him, we could get a DeWalt on the hip. We could get a Makita. We get a nice, miter saw, band saw, circular saw. We get a compressor get a fucking Brad nailer in there like fucking Happy Gilmore, and it's like, okay, you got all the tools, dog. You got all the tools. Go ahead. There's a house. Go ahead. You got all the tools. It's like, fuck, I can't, dude. I fucking can't anymore. The number of times people go, it's just another tool in the old tool belt. It's like, you don't know what the fuck you're doing, do you? You don't have a fucking clue about what you're doing. It's like, please spend some time on the trade. Spend some time on the trade. Stop arbitrarily collecting tools, right? You're a general contractor, right? Sometimes it's plumbing, sometimes it's electrical, sometimes it's framing, sometimes it's concrete. And you're sitting there going, yeah, but the tools though, it's like, fucking stop. And part of this enters into the data collection. It's all another tool. It's like, no. Art. There's an art to this. Art is about reduced essence, right? Fucking 8-foot piece of marble got reduced down to Michelangelo. You think he had all the tools? No. We've had all the tools for the hundreds of years since Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Bernini. And what have we made? What have we made? Nothing. Nothing that no one cares about. Like, fuck your tools. Oh.
That's a really good point too.
Yeah. I was in there.
You're in there. That was good. I'm glad we got that out. That's therapeutic. I think something I'll take from that though is that, and I completely agree, but discernment is a tool that you're going to get through experience, right? You can't have every tool accessible to you. You could work in the nicest gym with all the equipment, but if you don't know how to fucking use it, or if you don't know what to do with it, like, you can have someone in an empty room make a more effective change than you can. And it doesn't matter what the tools that you have. The discernment, it comes from experience. And the experience comes from doing shit wrong. Like, I've made probably more wrong decisions than I have right in my life. The thing is, I've learned from those decisions. So now I make wrong decisions at a lower clip than I do right decisions. And I have more right decisions. And if I make a right decision and it doesn't work, I have another right decision I can make after that, because I've made that decision wrong multiple times in multiple ways. And that's the thing that you need to get. Like, program design, it becomes a lot easier the more experience that you have, because now, yes, you have more tools because you've done more things, but you have a better decision-making process. You can discern better that in a person, people just become avatars at a certain point. It's like, I've seen an avatar of this person before, and I've helped them in this way. So I can use that as a decision-making guide for how I'm going to handle this person. And there's not that many of those. If you've been training for 5 years, you've probably seen almost all of those. We're always going to get hit with those like fringe cases that are somewhere out there, something that maybe some of us will never see in our life. And that's okay, because the better you have fine-tuned those decisions that you're making around training, then you understand the process of decision-making for that person. Right. And that's the experience piece of it. It's not understanding that we have all these tools for these fringe cases. It's understanding that, no, I know how to make decisions around training based off of the performance indicators that I'm seeing, the things that I'm seeing in real time, the things that this person is, maybe saying to me, but the things that this person's showing to me, I can make decisions based off of that to get them to have improvements based off of their baseline. And it doesn't matter what that baseline is. It doesn't matter if it's an ACL surgery, a labrum tear. It doesn't matter if it's someone that's overweight and likes to drink on the weekends. Like, you've seen this avatar before, and you can insert different problem, but there's very few ways to solve these problems when our tools are diet and exercise, right? It becomes very simple the more of these that you see, and that's the discernment process. Is that, okay, like, I've seen someone that's lazy that says they want results, but they don't want to work for them. I've seen someone that's a fucking dog and they're a workhorse and they'll do every single thing that I tell them to. I've seen someone that's post-off shoulder labrum and they want to get back into training. And I've seen ACL. Like, you've seen these things before in certain capacities or not, but you can change out that problem if you have the decision-making process and you have the ability to discern right and wrong in a given scenario. And that's the tool that you really need to fine-tune if you're a coach.
All right, let's recap, because I think when most people thought they were going to hear a programming checklist, they were like, number of days a week you got to train, upper body, lower body split. It's like, again, these are low level frequencies that really start to come into alignment when you understand the high level problems you're trying to solve. So where did we start? We started at the beginning. We started at the end. We bookended the programming process by going, right, here is what we're actually programming for and across the dimension of time that we're programming for. The big key, obviously, reverse engineering from the endpoint to an accurate start point. I think that's the key. You use that word, the accurate and honest start point. But I think in this process, having a conversation about how we got to the starting line is going to be one of the things that allows us to, and here's our next point when it comes to programming, understand the difference between the map and the territory, right? The map is what we're drawing ahead of us for the exercise program itself. The territory is laid out by all of the things that rerouted our path up until now. People think they understand the map, but get tripped up with the territory, right? So when we have discussions about where this process may have gone off the rails before, what we are trying to illuminate is different obstacles along the way in the territory that are going to show up on the map. And if you have one of my favorite books and one of my favorite authors, a guy named Joseph Campbell, if you ever get a chance to read any of his stuff, there's two, Hero of Thousand Faces and A Hero's Journey. You're sometimes you're Gandalf, sometimes you're Samwise as a coach, right? Sometimes you gotta toe this line of intervening character. I'll tell you who you're not as a coach, and this is worth remembering. You're not the main fucking character, so relax, right? You are there in an assisting role to lead someone through both map and territory. So, and then as we move through that, metrics, data, competition, and play, right? Those are things that you need to embed so that we can have these learning points throughout, so that we can understand, hey, look, are we moving closer to the end goal? Are we getting through and navigating the map? And as we're doing so, as we're tracking this, are what we're looking at as these mile markers towards our end goal. As we get to these mile markers, are we then using this as a point to look back and say, like, here's how we've navigated this far. In my experience, here's what the territory is going to look like moving into the last 5 pounds, the last 10 pounds, the last 10% body fat, what have you, right? So I think those are big. Understanding that play, competition, KPIs, and data points are going to really help us. They're like a legend on the map that allows you to understand what it is you're running into and helps you circumnavigate the territory and the map. And then finally, I think a thing that lays through all of this, and I think it's a virtue that, you as a human being, hopefully you exist outside of just being a fucking coach and you're actually a person who's real. Discernment, right? Discernment is what allows you to either reconcile or just fucking live with paradoxical information. Right? Because we don't know enough, and we know things on this linear dualistic scale of right and wrong. And when you do it enough, and you said, and you failed so many times, the number of ways that you can do something right. You also know the number of ways that things can go wrong. And it's about discerning, sometimes it's about discerning least wrong from most wrong. Right. And there's a level, it's not binary, right? Like the capital of Ontario is Peterborough, is less wrong than the capital of Ontario is Algeria, right? Algeria is a North African country. There's French influence and Arabic, and then Peterborough is a town in Ontario. It's just the wrong town that's the capital city. So there's degrees of wrong. So I think just exercising discernment as a coach is sort of a meta principle to exercise programming. So to kind of, the primacy and recency effect, I think if we walk away with something, the last thing that we talked about, I think discernment would be a good place to end it, right? And discernment comes from experience. I love that. Something you said earlier, discernment comes from experience, comes from experiencing failures, and it comes from experiencing success, right? And it comes from reflecting on both of those things. So, not exactly a straightforward checklist step by step. But that's not what this industry is. If you got into this for checking boxes, you're not in the people business, and you're probably won't going to be in the business for long, right? If you got in it for behavior change, if you got in it for lifestyle change, if you got in it for problem solving, you need to start framing these problems with the requisite level of complexity that they require to solve them in the first place or frame them in the first place. So, interested? The ebook is like 45 pages. I think it's quite long.
Yeah, it's meaty. It's good.
If you're still listening and you want to learn more about exercise programming, it's actually not a completely different take, but it'll go into exercise programming principles that were not covered in this episode. So if you're listening on Spotify, head on over to the YouTube channel and just click the link. While you're there, hit subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Download the ebook, and give us some feedback. If not, did we do it?
I think we did it. Yeah, that was great.
Sick. Should we make an announcement about the change in the podcast framework upcoming and continue to do so?
I think it's time.
It's time.
Yeah.
Do you want to do the honors?
I would love to. Yeah, starting in October, we're going back to our roots. So we will be offering one episode each week. Jordan and I will be doing an episode on Wednesdays. That will be our release. RX Radio, as you know it now, and as it has been for probably the last year and a half with James McIntosh and James there. We're kind of branching out. They're going to be doing their own thing, their own branding. They will have their own episode or their own podcast called Paint the Edges with James McIntosh. And then we have Strength in Context with Jorge, Big Papi de Hoyos, the Trace, and Brandon Schultz. So we're kind of branching out, 3 different podcasts kind of under the same roof, but Jordan and I will still be here as RX Radio. We have Jorge and Schultz, Strength and Context, and then the beloved duo, Mac and Thayer, with Paint the Edges. So you guys will still have access to all the same content and even more, but we'll just be doing it in a bit of a different format. So it'll kind of have the back to the roots feel with Jordan and myself, and we'll try and keep that moving forward.
Yeah, as those shows go up in early October, we'll put the links up in the show notes on Spotify and YouTube. But for now, grab the field guide to the coach's field guide, link in the YouTube channel. Hit subscribe while you're there, and we will see you guys next week.